Go behind the scenes and expose the wizardry, to pull back the curtain and say why and when and how and where, to help make sense and thus bring some order to what I see as a distinctly disordered world. By an accident of timing and pure good luck, I have lived the glory years of network television journalism, when news was still recognized as a public service, and when getting the story was the only thing that mattered, when we were reality TV. At its best, it's been energizing and humbling and very, very satisfying. I really like getting bad guys. I relish being part of the electronic hearth, as I know we were that miserable day in January of 1986 when we stayed on the air for 10 hours after the Challenger exploded to reassure a heartbroken nation. I like, what's not to like, saving lives, as I know we did after our 2020 story on a woman from Victoria, British Columbia, who was actually curing young women stricken with anorexia. And I loved celebrating the millennium with a few, make that 10 or 20,000 Indian revelers in Mumbai and Bombay, where a very wise fellow helped put things into perspective for me. I went on the air at midnight our time, which was 1:30 in the afternoon in New York, and Peter Jennings, who was of course anchoring our wonderful Millennium show when we did midnight around the world, Peter said to me, well, Lynn, everybody there looks very excited. Are the Indians really up for this millennium the way we are? And I said, well, Peter, I just spoke to a corporate executive a couple of days, and I put that question to him. I said, sir, aren't you excited? It's the millennium. And he looked at me very calmly and he said, well, you Americans are excited. It's your first. We've had a few already. Puts things into perspective. As a television reporter, I have had breakfast with giraffes. I have ushered Ralph Lauren, the man, not his clothes, into my bedroom closet. I have been mistaken for Geraldine Ferraro on her campaign plane. And I have flown the simulator that let me pretend I was actually flying in space. I've done stories on the following things that can kill you: lettuce, lead in your teacup, the sun, raw shellfish, sex, hurricanes, cosmetic plastic surgery. Sorry about the last one. And as one of the first wave of women in the business, I have not only covered the feminist movement, I've been part of it, stepping into jobs that did not exist until I got there, then chronicling the social revolution that has literally changed the rules of American society. Once upon a time, in 1953, there were 3 broadcast television networks and 3 fledgling 15-minute evening news broadcasts, and 1 female correspondent, 1953. Her name was Pauline Frederick, a very distinguished correspondent at the United Nations for NBC. By 1964, Pauline Frederick had some company. There were by then half a dozen women on network television. One of them, Marlene Sanders, was hired by ABC and inspired this inimitable Variety headline: tap Marlene Sanders as ABC News Hen. It's one word, news hen, N-E-W-S-H-E-N. You're not going to find it in the dictionary, so I'll give you my definition. News hen, an archaic, vaguely dismissive term for a newswoman, synonym news gal, coined when they were as rare as, well, hen's teeth, generally conjuring up an image of an irrelevant but an annoying busybody, despite having been applied to Lois Lane and other glamorous icons. I actually think there's a certain macho logic to this if you think of a news hen as a grown-up chick. The rarity of women in television newsrooms was reflected in the language of yet another headline, this one in the New York Times in, I think it was 1965. CBS Network and WNBC TV get their first girl reporters. Hands, please. Anybody here remember Walter Cronkite ever referred to as a boy reporter? So how come? What took us so long? Well, the men in charge had a simple answer, and the answer was authority. We just didn't have it. No woman had any authority whatsoever. Worse yet, no woman's voice had any authority. Her voice, said the then president of ABC News, meaning any woman's voice, Her voice is naturally thinner than a man's, with less timbre and range. This is 1964. A woman's voice is not as appropriate for reporting crucial events. For hardcore news, the depth and resonance of the male voice are indispensable. Then we have the man who was the president of NBC News, who told Newsweek magazine in 1971, "I have the strong feeling that audiences are less prepared to accept news from a woman's voice than from a man's." What's always bothered me about all of this is that it's not clear to me that anybody ever asked the audience, you, what you preferred. It is simply the way things were. It did get better, but it took time. By 1974, the 3 American television networks had about a dozen women on the air. There were nearly 10 times as many men. Once I was walking down the street and a passerby actually stopped me and said, "It's really nice to see a woman delivering the news." By 1977, there were 25 women on network TV air, 13% of the whole. By 1979, there were 39 women, and a CBS News president had the good grace to say, "I was just plain wrong." There were also more women behind the scenes, as camerawomen, as editors, as producers. There was indeed strength in numbers. And finally, I could go on a road trip with my crew and find someone from whom to borrow a hairdryer. I want to point out here this was not just about television or news or blondes. In November of 2000, I had the great good fortune to do an interview with Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose brilliant mind and true grit helped make women equal before the law when she was a lawyer. But in that interview in 2000, she took me back to 1993 when she was first appointed as the second woman on the bench of the Supreme Court to the equally liberated Sandra Day O'Connor. As Justice Ginsburg told me the story, the National Association of Women Judges, with great foresight of course, had a little celebration at the court when I took my seat. And they presented a gift to Sandra and a gift to me. And they're both t-shirts, she said, and hers reads, "I'm Sandra, not Ruth." And mine is, "I'm Ruth, not Sandra." Justice Ginsburg also said with great glee, "Now I went through the entire last term, which was what, my 7th year on the court, with no one calling me Justice O'Connor. It took 6 years," she said, "but now that to me was a sign we've really made it, that they know there are 2 women." I also asked Justice Ginsburg if with 2 women on the court there was, in her case, safety in numbers. "Oh yes," she said, "in the most literal of ways. When I became a member of the court, they rushed a renovation in the robing room, and it was to create a women's bathroom equal in size to that of the men's." I, of course, worry they will shrink it back now that there is only 1 woman on the Supreme Court. Fighting for facilities was only part of the problem for women in political life. As we started to take our place in Congress and in other public offices in 1972, and 1972 was a watershed year for all of us. But we still had plenty of obstacles to overcome. I've always admired a young lawyer from Colorado who made her first run for the House of Representatives that year, 1972. Her name is Pat Schroeder, and her motto became, "I have a brain and a uterus, and I use them both." Pat Schroeder told me a couple of years ago that when she said that, she was quoted as saying that on the paper, on television or in the paper, her mother called her up and said, "Did you really say that?" Pat said, "Yes, Mother, I said that." Thank goodness for Pat Schroeder. But this was not just about numbers. It was not just about getting in the door. It was about producing a better product, better reflecting the country, covering the news, and presenting the audience with a more textured, more accurate sense of the world we inhabit. Having women and minorities at every level of decision-making at a news organization or in public life is simply a way to ensure that our interests and our issues and our attitudes are included in the fabric of daily journalism, without which I think you have a very one-sided product indeed. Granted that all of society has opened up in the last 30 or 40 years, it is still the case that until women showed up in newsrooms or legislatures, there were no major stories or laws on child care, on sexual harassment, on women's rights. We are the ones who lobbied to combat the evils that were savaging our bodies: breast cancer, rape, battering husbands. We are also the ones who insisted in putting other successful women on the air so that little girls and little boys could know that women can do anything in the world. Which brings us back to the elections. First, a little history. It was only 150 or so years ago when women in this country were ridiculed or jeered or worse, jailed for daring to do everything from speaking out against slavery to keeping their own names when they got married. And when the bold activists started agitating to take their place in society, and oh my goodness, even to ask for the right to vote, society just couldn't take it. Men were aghast, some women deeply threatened. At the Women's Suffrage Convention of 1900, when we still didn't have the right to vote, your very own Carrie Chapman Catt called it the 3 I's. She said everything women did to improve themselves and society was called, and I quote, first indelicate, then immodest, and finally impracticable. Catt argued that the objections were, in fact, incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial. It took 72 years, starting from the time of the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls in 1848, but we finally got the right to vote. But when the 19th Amendment passed and was ratified in 1920, the great dreams of the suffrage leaders did not quite materialize. The theory had been that the newly enfranchised women would flock to the polls in droves, that the female voice would usher in an era of reform and good works. Well, not so much. Very few women did vote at first, and those who did tended to vote like their husbands. And then, as Lily Tomlin has pointed out, women discovered after all their work that they had no one to vote for but men. In fact, the only way some of the first women got to hold political office was when someone else, like their husbands, died. Seems awfully tough on the men. Actually, the first woman in the U.S. Senate, Rebecca Felton of Georgia, was appointed to fill the seat of a deceased man, not her husband, and serve for a total of 1 hour. Cut to November 2006. November 2006. Not only did we gain record numbers of women in office, but at least 8 senators won because of women voters. In Missouri, Montana, and Virginia, 3 states where the change from Republican to Democratic senators shifted the majority in the Senate, female voters were responsible. Ditto the Senate races in Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, and Maryland, where the election of the Democratic senators was accompanied by a measurable gender gap. Incidentally, Harold Ford Jr., who lost in Tennessee, was also the preferred candidate for a majority of women. According to the noted pollster Celinda Lake, women led the way for change, early deciding that the country needed to go in a new direction, especially when it concerned the war in Iraq. Other priorities for the women who set the agenda for this election: health care, retirement security, which includes child care and early education, equality for women, raising the minimum wage, and rebuilding areas affected by Hurricane Katrina. And here's something else to chew on. A large number of voters said that electing more women to Congress would change the scandals and corruption that have overwhelmed Washington. I'm a little wary of that one. I'm wary of it because, again, looking to history as the pattern, back in the 19th century, there was a branch of the suffrage movement that saw women as the natural reformers, basing their campaign on getting us the right to vote on the so-called moral superiority of women. We're not, really. We're not. But my hero, Susan B. Anthony, even suggested, lightheartedly, I like to think, that once women got the right to vote, they would actually get in there and redecorate all the polls and make them much more pleasant places to come to. She also said that once women got into office, oh my goodness, the reforms we would see in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. Right away, she announced they would banish the cuspidors, those nasty things in which people spit the tobacco juice. And I quote, here's what would happen when women got into office. The heating registers will no longer emit the fumes of burned tobacco juice. She really hated smoking. The 2 houses and the corridors will cease to be filled with tobacco smoke thick enough to cut with a knife. The desks will not be used as footbenches. Decency and good order will be observed in the discussions, and the proprieties of civilized society will obtain. Then justice, not bargain and sale, will decide legislation. Well, I think that's a bit steep for anyone to accomplish. But the truth is, it was an interesting way to think about things. Interesting to think anybody could do that. The question is, can anybody do it today? Especially in this day when we are in such a red and blue nation. I think back to where we are today, and I think that it is a divisiveness that Mary Louise Smith anticipated and deplored. Because along with the gains that women made in elective office a few weeks ago, they have also increased the partisan gap. Party differences are far greater among women than among lawmakers in all. In other words, there are nearly twice as many Democrats as Republicans among the women who have been elected to state legislatures. Twice as many Democrats as Republicans. I'm sorry, that's legislatures overall. State legislators, 53% are Democrats, 45%, that's it. Overall, there are more Democrats than Republicans in state legislatures. 53-45 Democrat, Republican. But among women in state legislatures, 68% Democrat, 31% Republican. The breakdown in Congress is similar. Now, if you're a Democrat, you might think this is just a spectacular idea, all those Democrats out there. But if you're a Republican, it is not very encouraging for the prospect of more women in the pipeline coming up and for the future of women in the Republican Party. And if you are an American citizen, it is not very encouraging for the concept of collegiality and compromise. Compromise, I think, is something that has gone away from our Congress. We haven't seen it in a long time. It's something we desperately need. Actually, I think Jane Addams got it right back in 1897. At the time she said, "I'm not one of those who believe that women are better than men. We have not wrecked railroads, nor corrupted legislatures, nor done many unholy things that men have done. But then we must remember, we have not had the chance." So, now we've got our chance. Now what? Will women, Democrats and Republicans, work together to put children first and enact legislation to care for those most vulnerable members of our society? Will women find a way out of war? Will Congress be more family friendly? A few issues to consider: more flex time in the workplace, paid family leave, all sorts of initiative to relieve the stress on stressed out working parents, which means virtually all parents, which means giving families more time together while trying to make ends meet. Those are the kind of family values that make sense. The potential for real change by our newly elected leaders is exciting. But I must tell you, there is one little thing that concerns me. For many years now, I have been proud of the fact that some of us in journalism have made others more conscious of the words we are using. So that, for example, a murder victim no longer need be identified by the shape of her body, as in sexy blonde, killed, or a prime minister by her ability to bear children. I'm talking here about those tabloid covers, you've seen them all, and there was a headline. There were many headlines at the time. When Golda Meir was elected Prime Minister of Israel, headlines read, "Grandmother becomes Prime Minister." I've always felt that if a woman was elected to high office or did something newsworthy, it was mostly because of her brain, not necessarily her body. Astoundingly, just this year, when Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the Harvard-educated economist, was inaugurated as the first female president of Liberia, she was actually introduced on World News Tonight as a 67-year-old grandmother has become the president of Liberia. We found out about her Harvard education and her career as an economist much later in the sentence. Anyway, this has been an issue for me, and I have fought hard to change these words so that we deal with people as individuals, not necessarily by gender. So now we have the first female Speaker of the House who talks about using her mother of five voice on a regular basis. Nancy Pelosi doesn't seem to mind that she is described as a grandmother. She actually likes it. So maybe it's safe to be a grandma again. As the proud spoiler of 3 granddaughters and a newborn grandson, I really do get it. We are not our grandmother's grandchildren today. But if it's so cool to be a grandma and a political leader, how come no guy up there calls himself a grandpa? The rules have changed, or have they? As a television reporter, I know they've changed because today I get fewer requests for interviews on the subject of what's it like being a woman in television news. It's a question I could never answer because I have no basis for comparison. Anyway, now the question they all ask is, what's it like being an older woman in television news? I try to pretend I haven't heard the question. The truth is, I think I knew that the end, or at least the broadcast end, was near during the aftermath of the 2000 elections. My assignment that week was to cover the Supreme Court decision, and I was waiting for it to be handed down, and I was sitting in my office emailing back and forth with my middle stepson who teaches at New York University, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw that the Supreme Court decision was being announced. So I quickly emailed him, gotta run, Andy, Supreme Court decision is being handed down, watch it, it's important. He emails me back, where can I watch it? I email him back, all the networks will carry it, all the cable stations, turn on your television. He emails me back, oh Lynn, television is so 90s, where can I watch it on the web? We used to call it people power, the rule of the many. Blogs and websites which bypass us are the media equivalent of the Iowa caucuses, a chance for individuals to own their own presses, to be their own party bosses. I think I watched it all begin back in the 1970s with an amazing publication I'm sure some of you will remember called the Whole Earth Catalog. It was a handy publication. It taught you to do such practical things as grow your own organic bean sprouts, how to deliver your own child, how to bury your own dead. I mean, all sorts of things you never knew when you needed it. Its motto was, we are as gods and we might as well get good at it. The truth is, not everyone is good at it today, but it doesn't seem to matter. We live in an era when news, or at least opinion, is delivered on the internet, on 24/7 cable, on your iPod, and someday I am totally convinced it will be delivered on your electric toothbrush. I think that our standards as news consumers have slipped. I think our tolerance for mistakes is too high. We are so overwhelmed by the abundance of words and pictures and images out there from unvetted, unedited, unprofessional sources. I think it's harder than ever to determine fact from fiction. All that as profits have replaced public service. When I was a reporter at local television in New York City, we had a theater critic and a movie critic who did movie reviews at least once a week. Now they report the box office gross. The rules have all changed. Which is in part why I wrote my book. Reporting the news on television can be glamorous and it can be frustrating. It can be energizing and debilitating. It can puff up your ego and make you feel like a dope. And every now and then it can be really, really satisfying because you straighten out the facts or you catch somebody lying or because maybe, just maybe, you save a life. That's what my book is about. It's also about the subtle distortion of reality that the box can produce, a disconnect that has struck me throughout my career. The gulf between television and real life, between the images and the message we send out, and the truth behind the camera. Sometimes I think we get clear to the core and we illuminate an issue for the very first time. Sometimes we obscure the issue or exaggerate it. And sometimes what you see on television news has nothing to do with the news at all. All of it gets on the air. At worst, it's a medium that follows rather than leads. At its best, a glorious rocket into new worlds. As a passionate defender of an unfettered press, I know that we would not be aware of everything from My Lai to Abu Ghraib without a free press and without television news. I know it would have taken a lot longer for the nation to regain its sanity without the electronic hearth pulsating information and reassurance on that awful morning of September 11th, 2001. But I make no apologies for our occasional inability to get with the program. But it's why I've stepped outside the box for my book. Stepping outside the box also means uttering the unspeakable in my business. Sometimes it's not about television. I have a life, thank you very much, one that I cherish, but one that is very different from the one that I faced growing up. When I was a child, little girls let little boys beat them at tennis. Moms mostly stayed at home, and many colleges did not admit female students. Red was the color of communism, not Republican states, and working out was something you did to a problem. You didn't say words like cancer or breast in public. We wanted to be cool, not hot, and hot flashes were news bulletins, not something to endure. My father was a professional basketball player who dazzled the sports world long before the jump shot was even invented. And I owe most of my values to lessons I learned during 2 decades at summer camp. I am also the only person you have ever met who was on Bandstand. If that all sounds like ancient history, it's not, which I know because I majored in classical Greek, which really is ancient history. Incidentally, if any of you has a kid or some of you students looking for something to study, take classical Greek. It really will make you a better person, I promise. I also know the answer to the question that continues to nag every working woman in America. And I think it's best illustrated by a cartoon. It's a barnyard scene. There's that barnyard thing again. But it's a barnyard scene with a mother hen in front, and she's tossing a couple of eggs in the air. And behind her are 2 more hens, and they're gossiping. And they're gossiping about the hen up in front. And one says to the other, and this is the caption, "How she's able to manage a career and still juggle her family, I'll never know." I know the answer. The eggs get scrambled. Get used to it. As contemporary women, we have reinvented every stage of our lives, turning dissatisfaction with convention into new rules for success, trying to reshape the battle of the sexes into a more practical form of peaceful coexistence. Once unwelcome in all but the lowest paid pockets of journalism, my generation of female reporters hit the business when a job could become a profession. When we begged, then demanded, then won the right to work. We came on the scene as girls who were supposed to know our place, which was nowhere. Today, with the privileges we've earned as powerful women, we know that our place is everywhere. So now what? Will the young women of the next decades be so lucky or so persevering? Well, they have to be. I am deeply sorry that so many young women today don't like the term feminist because I think it's a good, precise term. Let me tell you Mary Louise Smith's definition, one of the last times that I interviewed her. A feminist, she said, is a man or a woman who believes that the rights of women should be equal to those of men, politically, socially, economically. Nothing scary about that, she said. I'd add one more aspect to that. I also think it means we have the same responsibilities as do men. And I don't think it signifies warfare, because men are not the enemy and women are not the only solution. We're all flying on this planet together. I don't think that makes us superwomen, except, of course, the fact that we are the multitasking gender, and so maybe we do have to do it all. But we are smart enough to make compromises when they matter. I certainly did. As a new wife and unexpected stepmom, I turned political campaigns into social studies lessons for 3 young boys, and I regularly put candidates on hold when the plumber returned my phone call. My priorities are very clear. I have also faced the heartbreak of deaths too soon and come out the other side. My husband died of cancer. I am a cancer survivor. I've written about all of that for the first time, in part because I think the pain that I went through is exactly the pain that so many of you, so many of us have also endured. And because I've learned some valuable lessons about caregiving, about grief, and about survival that I hope will help somebody else. I've also related my adventures as I started dating again in an occasionally futile exercise in the world that is every bit as much fun as an adult as it was when I was an adolescent. It is a very short chapter. But just so you realize, my ego is not entirely wrapped up in my book, despite the fact that there are, in fact, 2 pictures of me on the cover, 3 if you count the spine. I am confident that someone, somewhere, will keep me in my place. Our audience always does. A number of years ago, I did an interview with a television columnist, and I went on my usual rant about why is it that women have to be relatively young and attractive and wrinkle-free to get on the air when there's all these fat, ugly, balding men on television out there. Well, a fellow by the name of Ralph read what I'd said, and he picked up a pencil and he wrote me a letter. Now, you're always a little wary of letters that are written in pencil, but this one was okay. He said in his letter that he'd read in the paper how I'd said we should have some overweight women as TV reporters. I did say that. And that I'd criticized the way some attractive female reporters are seductive and make love to the camera, an accurate quote. And then he said, and I quote, "There is nothing wrong with a cute lady becoming a TV anchor person as long as she is talented. For example, I saw you not too long ago and you are reasonably good looking and have some talent. The letter is framed. It is on my office wall. It keeps me honest every single day, inside and outside the box. And I hope as you continue to lead your lives and live your lives, inside or outside of politics, if anyone says anything critical, you will remember Ralph and me and Mary Louise Smith and Carrie Chapman Catt, and you will realize you can do anything at all. Thank you very much.
We do have time for a few questions, and for those who have questions, if they just come up to the mic and ask their question, and please be brief in asking your question, and we'll move from here. And again, we'll probably cut off this in about 15 minutes or so and proceed with the reception and book signing.
Hi. Is it on? Well, I'll give it a shot first.
Is this on now?
Now it is, yes.
You kind of spoke about how it's difficult to find the truth, and with TV being reality, it's not always the correct picture of reality and things like that. Where do you see in our current broadcast journalism where we can find that integrity? And what do you see in the future? Are you optimistic or hopeful, or is it going to continue somewhat of a decline?
It's a downward slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful because I'm an optimist by nature. Don't get me wrong. I'm very critical of my business. I'm self-critical. I do, however, think there are some wonderful reporters out there who commit journalism every single day, and a lot of them are at my very network. I think the answer, there's a lot of questions you asked there. Let me try to do a broad answer and some specific things. I think the answer to where to find the truth, it's difficult, but here's the answer. You've got to read, watch, listen to more than one thing. You cannot get your news from one source. If you consider yourself a liberal, you better start watching Fox TV just to see what they're doing. If you consider yourself a conservative, you better be reading the New York Times. You've got to know what's happening on both sides. It's the only way you're going to get a true picture. I realize nobody has time to read or watch or listen to everything. Honestly, I'm sympathetic. But I do think you have to form a trust. You have to come up with the sources that regularly give you what you consider to be the right way of looking at things. And you cannot only read, watch, or listen to things that agree with you. You've got to go to other sources. It's really critical. You'll be surprised. Every now and then in that other network or that other paper, you're going to find some awfully good reporting that might change your point of view about something. I also think it's helpful to see what's going on with the blogs, but the blogosphere has gotten so huge, I don't know how anybody has time. You could waste all day long just poking around. But I think it's important to see. My problem with blogs is that they're opinion, they're not fact. And nobody's editing them. I really like editing. I really like editors. I really like somebody catching me and saying, hey, did you really mean to say that? And then I'll go, oh my goodness, that's not what I wanted to say at all. So you've got to figure out who the people are that you trust. You've got to hold us to a very high standard. You all do have the ultimate power because you can change the channel. You can get rid of us. And you should do that if we're not doing well, and you should let us know. Although, let me put in my plea here, feel free to change the channel if you don't like what we're doing, but give us a chance. I'll tell you what's done us in, the remote control. You all sit there, you give us what, maybe 3 minutes? Click, 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 click. You don't like what I'm talking about? You're a little bored, don't like the color of my sweater? Click, 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 click away. Slow down. Give me a chance. Let me finish my sentence. Let me ask another question. Let the person answer the question. Give it a shot. There's a great cartoon in the New Yorker a couple of weeks ago. An old guy, my age, sitting on a couch next to a young kid, and they're watching television, and the old guy is saying to the kid, when I was your age, I had to walk 5 miles through the snow to change the channel. So give us a chance. But we live in a world of instant everything, and nobody wants to take the time. And That's an awfully long answer, and I know you don't have time to watch and read and listen to everything, but try it while you find the places where you think you're getting the best version of the news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned the quote that women, where they said that we hadn't really been given the chance to do things like wreck railroads, and
Right.
With a female speaker in the House and Speaker of the House, and possibly and hopefully female president in the future. Do you think that possibly if something does go wrong during those terms that the gender will be brought into play as opposed to the actual person's leadership, and do you think that will be something that we also have to prove almost?
Yes, I think it will, and I think we'll get over it pretty quickly.
Okay.
I think it goes with the territory. Just the way it goes with the territory, that as women, people are going to talk about what we wear and how we look. Get used to it. It's part of the game. When Katie Couric took over the evening news at CBS, everybody wondered what was she going to wear. They criticized her clothes. Nobody criticized Charlie Gibson on what he wore the first day. They took over approximately the same time. It goes with the territory, and they'll get tired of that, you know. But it's part of it. Yes, I think that if Nancy Pelosi was, you know, already, well, I guess with the first thing with the with Mirtha and Steny Hoyer, there wasn't too much gender stuff that came in there. But you did notice that people talked about what she wore when she had her meeting with the president. That's going to happen. Someone asked me the other day if I thought that if Nancy Pelosi fails, it would be bad for women. In other words, would it stop another woman from getting that job? I think we're beyond that. I think that kind of comment might be made, but I definitely think we are beyond that. And I think, yes, there will be comments about her gender if she does something wrong, and when the first woman president is president, oh my goodness, are they going to have a great time with that one? But I then think it'll go away, and we just have to get over that hump and then just keep moving. But then I'm an optimist, and I could be totally wrong. Yes?
I could ask this a couple of different ways, but again, you already mentioned her name, so let me just say Katie Couric, and give us your reaction both in terms of media and also perhaps in the context of your comments.
My reaction to Katie Couric at the CBS Evening News. Well, let me first say that I think it's great that there's a woman solo anchoring the evening news, and why did it take 50 years? My second point on that would be, I think it's terrific. CBS was in terrible trouble. They were way at the bottom of the heap in the ratings. They had to do something to shake up the system. And isn't it nice that they selected someone who's talented, who has broadcast experience as a reporter, as an anchor? They did not go to a Miss Universe contest. You know, they didn't go to Hollywood. They're perfectly capable of doing that, don't get me wrong. But they didn't, so I'm glad. Having said that, I wish Katie luck, but not all that much luck, because I'm still at ABC and I want Charlie Gibson to be the one you're watching at that hour. So I've also only seen the first show. I saw the first show, and I think first shows are a little bit like first dates. I think you can't judge anybody on the first date, and she was going to get the call back anyway, so that's okay. Here's the problem. The problem is evening news is no longer about gender. Evening news, it's about our diminished audience. We are all desperate. I bet you, if I say, how many of you in this room grew up watching network evening news at dinner time, every hand would go up, right? How many of you watch the evening news, whether it was Huntley Brinkley or Cronkite or, yeah, most of you, exactly. Now, how many of your kids are watching it? Right? Not is the answer. So we've lost our audience. Don't hang the crepe yet. We've still got about 20, 25 million viewers among the networks at that hour. But it's not going to last. And that's why we're all on the web. We all have websites, we have blogs. I don't know how active you are on your computer or with the evening news, but my goodness, you can get a personal email from Charlie Gibson every single day if you want, telling what's going to be in the news. You can write back. You can register your comments. You can, a friend of mine who is a columnist at Newsweek, which should be a once-a-week column, says he feels like he's working for a wire service because he's constantly filing on the web and everything and talking to readers. And we're all under pressure. We all have to deal with this. Our audiences are way, way smaller than they used to be. I will make the very bold, which is to say not bold at all, prediction that 10 years from now there will not be 3 network evening newses. At least they won't look that way. Somebody will disappear, something will be very different, one of them will undergo major change. So that's what we're looking at right now. I mean, at 2020, where I am at ABC News, 2020, we used to be so protective of our material that if I had a story on Friday night, nobody in the network, let alone another network, was allowed to know what I was working on or see what I was working on. And you couldn't give it to the morning news, to Good Morning America, until maybe that morning. Maybe World News Tonight was allowed to have a little piece of it if we really were feeling good about them, but it was ours alone, and wait for Friday night at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and now you can see what we've got. Today, at 2020, we are doing a daily webcast at noon or 12:30, in which on Monday, you will see a piece of my Friday story. It's out there. We give it away. We want the widest possible dissemination. It's a totally changed landscape. And if we don't figure it out, we're going to lose our audience entirely. Our websites are now a major source of driving, eyeballs is the magic word, of course, for computers, and we want all those eyeballs at our website. So we all not only, I'll do a piece for 2020, and then I'll do it for our website, and I'll give you added value. Another little new term. I'll give you added value. I'll put things into the website piece that are not in my air, because airtime is more precious than website space. So it's a changed world, and that's a long answer to Katie, but I hear she's not doing very well. I'm sorry about that, as just in general, but not everybody can do all that well. And as long as Charlie isn't happy. Yes?
What chances do you get for Hillary Clinton being as the Democrat nominee?
Hillary is the Democrat nominee. Well, she's certainly running. There's no question about that. Have you seen her here yet? She's coming. I think I saw she's coming to Iowa at some point. There's an Iowa day. I mean, soon. Say again?
Everybody does.
No, I know, but I thought I saw a specific Iowa day with her. I'm not sure. I think that Hillary's vote can be polarizing. She's also been an awfully good senator for New York State. And who would have thunk that she could have done as well as she's done so far, given all the publicity and all the negative stuff. I know Hillary personally. I will say to any one of you that if you sat down at a table with her, you would absolutely adore her. She's a wonderful one-on-one person. She's a little bit different one-on-one than she is in front of a camera. She's a very interesting, very smart woman. I think she's running. Do I think she can? I used to a year ago say, all she has to do is win one state. Assuming she would win all the same blue states and not lose any blue states, all she needs is one red state. I haven't got a clue if those rules are going to hold or not. I will tell you she is definitely an interesting candidate. I will also tell you I've been reading Barack Obama's new book, which is riveting. We had a conversation at lunch the other day about Obama, a few friends of mine and I, and someone said, my God, he's a rock star. And someone else said, yeah, but Hillary's a rock star. We got these two rock stars in the party in the Democratic Party right now, and both of whom draw immense crowds. I mean, Hillary is magic wherever she goes. She draws huge, huge crowds. So does Obama now. That's going to be really interesting to watch. I also think, I don't think it's settled at all on the Republican side. I don't know what's going to happen there. Rudy is definitely running, or making it look as if he is. There many, many things could happen. And this year is going to be interesting because with the shakeup in the order of events now, yes, you're first. You still get to be first, but after you comes, is it Nevada? I think Nevada's doing a caucus, and then there's New Hampshire, and then there's South Carolina got moved up. So all of a sudden, everybody's racing to South Carolina. You watch, you see all the Democrats are running down to South Carolina. It's just amazing. I don't know what's going to happen. And what I do know from all my years of covering politics is just short of 4 years out is way too soon to believe that you know what's going to happen. I do know that everybody whose name I've already mentioned is running for president, however, and at some level. And it will be interesting to see. And I don't know. Diane was saying before that that Iowa's not going to be as much fun this year because of your governor, because there will be the sense that the favorite son gets it, so why bother? But wait and see. Wait and see. You've got a lot to go. Yes? I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you. Which of my awards do I consider to be life-changing, not only for my audience, but for myself? I don't consider any of my awards life-changing. I will say that there are a couple of stories that have changed not only my life, but other people's lives. And the one that I mentioned before, the anorexia story, I think we went out to British Columbia to do, Western Canada, to do a piece, like a 12-minute piece for 2020, on a woman who was dealing with anorexics. I wasn't very high on it, but I said, okay, I would go and meet her. We went out there, the woman was a saint, nothing short of that, and we wound up doing the whole hour and subsequently several hours. I know we saved lives with that story because people wrote us and called us and told us that they had learned from the techniques that Peggy Claude Pierre used, that was the woman's name, that they had learned how to deal with their own children. And a number of years later, I learned the following thing. The story that we did was made available to a young woman in London suffering from eating disorders. Princess Diana got in touch with Peggy Claude Pierre, invited her to London, and was consulted with her to cure her own problems. So knowing that you save lives is about the best that you can do in this business, and that to me was important. I would also have to say that in general, covering the space program changed my life. As a kid, I was fascinated by space. Any of you remember there was a show on television called Tom Corbett Space Cadet? God, I grew up watching that show. I just loved that show. And as a little kid, I thought flying in space would be very neat. And of course, girls didn't get to do that for the longest time. And I started covering the shuttle program when women, coincidentally, when women and minorities were brought in. No longer were they just white male test pilots, but scientists of every color and stripe and persuasion. And it satisfied so many of my yearnings to know what was out there, and it also inspired me. I think I deeply believe in the space program, not necessarily the way it's been run, but the way it ought to be run. I think that we need something to reach for beyond ourselves. I think space represents that to a great extent. I also think we ought to have room in the budget for both feeding our poor and exploring other planets. I think it's part of human nature, and I think it should be part of our lives. And I am so excited that every time something happens in space, and I'm so gratified that I had the opportunity to cover it because it was a great experience. And there aren't many shuttle flights left. I would still urge you to go see one if you haven't. It's really exciting. And you won't forget it. You not only see the shuttle lift off, you feel it. You feel the energy on your chest. It comes drifting across. Somebody here is going to say Lynn drifting is the wrong word. I don't know. Whatever the sound waves, whatever those energy waves do, they come flying across, and you feel it. It's one of the most extraordinary things I've ever done. So the space program has been very, very good. Anything else?
In our society, what would you say is the difference between a sex symbol and a sex object? Because I think the line in our media sometimes, I guess you could say, being blurred.
I'm not sure I see it. Is there a difference between a sex symbol and a sex object?
There is a difference, of course, but I mean, can you just talk about this a little bit? Because I think there's a lot of places in our media where, a woman, where a woman is kind of considered as both almost, and obviously she doesn't want the negative connotation. I don't know if you get what I mean here.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think there are certainly women and men who have based their careers on being sex symbols, right? And they make money out of that, and they get famous from that, and they're successful, and they like that. I guess the only difference I can think of is if it's unwanted, then you're being a sex object, I guess. I don't know. I think, don't get me wrong. nothing wrong with sex.
Okay, let me rephrase this. Do you think there are some women who maybe want to be a sex symbol but end up being a sex object
I do
on
indeed.
TV?
I do indeed. And by the way, actually, it's an interesting point apropos of what's going on today. I worry a little bit that that liberation has meant something different for a new generation of women who are pushing it in directions that's maybe was not intended to be, and I'm not sure where we're going with all of that. But I think the answer is someone once said to me, well, how do I know if what I'm doing is sexual harassment, to take a little bit further along? And someone said the answer is never say something to a woman you wouldn't say to your own sister. So that either does or doesn't make it clear, but I'm not sure it does, but we can have this conversation separately. Thank you all very much. You're a great audience, and I love coming to
Thank you also for coming tonight. I wanted to remind you that we do have a reception in the corner. And also Lynn's books, 3 of them for sale. Failure is Impossible, Susan B. Anthony in her own words, Tall Blondes, which is about giraffes, and her newest book, which is Outside the Box, a memoir. And she will be signing those. So thank you very much.